I vividly recall the day my life was turned upside down. I can still picture the weather, remember what I had for dinner, and the moment my wife stepped into our apartment. Funny how I hadn't paid attention to such small details before. We had been married for over 5 years, living happily and savoring life together, steering clear of discussions about kids. At least, that was our mantra. Lately, though, I'd begun to broach the subject, curious about my wife's thoughts on it. Zoe had made it clear from the start that she didn't want children. At that point, I was on the same page. But as I hit my 30s, the idea of starting a family began to weigh on my mind. I didn't push it. I merely contemplated. "But we're doing great," Zoe replied when I asked her if she ever thought about having kids. "Absolutely, we're doing well," I said, walking over to her and planting a kiss on her lips. "I just want to understand where you stand on the whole child thing, now or in the future." "Definitely not now. I just want to enjoy being with you." Her response completely satisfied me, so I let the topic rest. That Tuesday was surprisingly warm for October. Zoe was running late from work, and I scrambled to whip up a dinner of potatoes and chicken. I even managed to eat and unwind a bit while catching a movie on TV, but as 8 o'clock rolled around, my concern started to creep in. When I noticed my phone was dead, I initially figured it just needed a charge. Yet as time went on and Zoe still wasn't home, my unease grew. Finally, the key turned in the lock. I was about to voice my frustration about her late return, but the words caught in my throat. There she stood, split lip, swollen cheek, torn tights, and tears streaming down her face. I rushed to her, desperate to understand what had happened, trying to push away the horrific thoughts flooding my mind. Zoe was sobbing, and I struggled to find the right words while checking her for injuries. At first glance, it seemed there were no serious wounds, just bruises and scrapes. I quickly poured her a glass of cognac and encouraged her to drink it. Once she calmed down a bit, I gently probed for details. With great difficulty, she told me she had been attacked and her bag was stolen. I tried to fight back, but, "Did they do anything else to you?" "Do you think that's not enough?" My wife shot back, her voice laced with anger. I didn't argue. Instead, I held her tightly, formulating a plan for what to do next. "Were you raped?" I forced myself to ask. It was agonizing to look at her and think about the ordeal she would have to relive. I sighed with relief when she shook her head. "The marks will fade, and we'll get through this, but we can't let this go unpunished. Do you know who did this?" Zoe simply shook her head. "Go," I instructed her. "Where to?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear, her body shrinking back. "To the emergency room." I brushed aside her weak protests and objections. I quickly grabbed only the documents we had at home, stashing them in a bag, and then urged her to get a medical examination. In a daze, I watched from the sidelines as the doctor examined her. She averted her gaze, responding to questions with short, clipped answers. After that, it was time for the police report, and her testimony came out all jumbled and shaky. At first, she mentioned there were multiple attackers. Now, she insisted it was just one person whose face she couldn't remember. The policeman looked at me with doubt, a hint of reproach in his eyes. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, suspecting I was the one who had hurt her and had brought her in to deflect blame. In that moment, I couldn't care less about his assumptions, as long as they did their job properly. Then the most surprising part unfolded. Zoe's bag was discovered in the bushes of a nearby house. It still contained her phone and money, so nothing had been stolen. But then the question arose, why? It turned out she had taken a taxi home, Not from work, but from the other side of the city. Naturally, this led to a search for the taxi driver who had suddenly become a suspect. Throughout all of this, Zoe remained quiet and withdrawn, not responding to any questions. I realized then that the story was far more complicated than they were portraying. When the taxi driver told me he had picked my wife up in that condition, everything clicked into place. Zoe finally confessed. She had been attacked by a lover she'd met a couple of months prior while on vacation with a friend. She hadn't known he could be so aggressive. He had gotten annoyed over something trivial that evening. In a panic, she ran away, but of course, she couldn't admit that. So she concocted this story, and now she wanted to withdraw the report. I sat there, feeling as if I'd been drenched in muck, while others looked on with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. Some people felt for me, but others simply didn't understand. What had she needed? Why on earth was she trying to apologize? This was more than just a personal humiliation. It was a betrayal laid bare. She could have told me about this affair at home, faced the consequences, and spared us this public embarrassment. Our relationship came to a swift end. A divorce wrapped up in painful hassle, as Zoe clung to the hope that I might forgive her. But that didn't happen. The judge didn't even grant us a moment to think things through. He made a quick decision in favor of dissolving our marriage.